G'day from Australia. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm making this broadcast. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My name's Ashley Davis. Welcome to my live stream. This is the second coding live stream that I've done. In the last session last week, I did an overview of the project, my motivations for doing it. So please see that as a good introduction. What I'm doing is I'm building a Visual Studio Code extension for editing a Kanban board. Now, I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing while I'm coding, but please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll look at that every so often. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is AshleyDavis75. So basically I've come to the end of prototyping my project. I was due to sit down and actually start some coding last week, but I'm only allocating 30 minutes for these live streams. So we ran out of time really quickly, and if you were watching last time, you will have seen me completely fail to get Jest set up. I did have a look at that afterwards, and I'm going to show you what I did to fix that in a moment. For the moment though, let's just get started. I'll show you the repo. I'll show you where we're going to get started. I'm going to install Jest from scratch again, just so you can see that there's no magic, and it is actually fairly easy to do if you've practiced it, which I've done now. Let's get started. I'm just going to start by showing you the repo again. So this is the code repository. If you look in my GitHub, you'll see Taskboard VS Code extension. So this is actually derived from another code repo. So that was a really good starting point because it includes React in the extension, so I can have a React UI in my Visual Studio Code extension. That seemed non-trivial to do, and I didn't really want to go down that black hole. So that's why I've started with something existing, a really good starting point. I've done my prototyping with this. You can grab this for yourself. In a minute I'm going to show you how to clone it. But there's some instructions here on how you can debug it and how you can run the React UI by itself. Now, of course, this all started because I was looking into something called Foam, which is you can find here, GitHub Foam Bubble Foam. This is a suite of Visual Studio Code extensions to help you with your note taking. I wanted to be able to basically have all my to-do lists in this and replace Trello with Foam plus this extension that I'm creating. So just to show you where we're at, or what the end of the prototyping looks like. This is that code repo opened in Visual Studio Code. If you'll remember that last time I tried demoing this, I had a bit of a problem getting it started. I fiddled with it for a bit and I got it started. You know, there is a problem in the code here, and if we get the problem again now, we're going to go actually dive in and fix it. But this is just because I want to give you a demo of where the prototype got to. So I'm just going to hit F5 to debug this extension. It's going to start up a new copy of Visual Studio Code with the extension loaded. As you can see here now, it's just building the using Webpack to build the React app that's embedded in the extension. This shouldn't take long. It's just compiling at the moment the TypeScript code there for the extension. Okay, so it's loaded up a new copy of Visual Studio Code. I've got another open source project of mine loaded in Visual Studio Code at the moment for testing. To bring up the extension, I do Control-Shift-P, open Kanban board. Oh, I had a breakpoint set there from when I was playing around with this earlier. Let's just continue that. Yeah, so the problem we're having last week, and I sort of fiddled around with it and got it working so I could show you it, but we were getting this issue. It's not exactly obvious what that means, but something to do with our Kanban board is failing to start up. Now I did try opening the developer tools here. You can open the developer tools on Visual Studio Code. Toggle developer tools. That gives you a little bit more information. You can look in the console. There's a lot of errors here, but this big error here anyway is not related to the plugin or the extension that I'm developing. This is to do with some other extension. Just so I get like a clear error log, I'm just going to clear that out just so I can see what happens with mine clearly. So try open the Kanban board again. You get this error coming up. You get a big long call stack. You can actually drill down into this. This wasn't in the end helpful. I'm just showing you how I debugged this earlier. So we're all tracing through code here that's logging an error, and I just want to find the source of the error. Actually, what I can do here is set a breakpoint here. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here, where it's actually logging a notification for the error. I'll try opening the Kanban board again. Kind of thought we'd hit that breakpoint there, but we didn't seem to. Just try that again. I'll try one here. Oh, cool. So I've got a breakpoint hit where it's reporting an error message from my extension. What I can do now is I can walk up the call stack here and see if I can find anything interesting. Oh, here I can see where it's actually catching the error. It's actually catching an error here. Now, this didn't actually lead to anything because I don't know why, but I'll show you what I did do to fix this in a minute. But you can actually set a breakpoint here as well and kind of walk through it, find the error that gets thrown. But it's not very useful because the error that gets thrown is just this, like it doesn't give you any more information than what we've got here, which doesn't really tell me what the problem is. Anyway, but then I thought, like, I'm already debugging this. So we started this in the debugger, so why don't I debug it? As you saw before, I had a breakpoint here, and I'll put a breakpoint as well. I hope everyone can see this. Let me get rid of that. I'll put a breakpoint at the top here in start command handler, which is like the entry point for this extension. And I'll just stop it and I'll start debugging it again. Now to actually start it, I have to kind of run that command to open the Kanban board, and then it's going to hit this this breakpoint here, and I can hopefully step through this and see if there's a problem and where the problem is. So I'm just opening the Kanban board. It's hit the first breakpoint, which is the activate function. I can step over this. Nothing seems to have gone wrong there. I'll just let that run. I'll step over this. Oh, and I've hit a problem. There is some sort of weird problem here. It looks like a whole bunch of minified code because it's telling me here that I can basically unminify it to view it. So I'm going to do that. So it's caught an error here. And I can actually see what the error is this time. Can everyone read that? Cannot read property document of undefined. So I was stepping over, where was it? Where's the extension code gone? I was stepping over this line of code here. And it was saying that cannot read document of undefined. So the undefined must be the editor. There must not be an active text editor. So I'm just gonna change this code to account for that. So I'm thinking I'll get rid of that. This could now potentially be, you can see here, text editor or undefined. So I have to put a conditional here. So now my document can be document or undefined. And I just have to follow this change through the code. So it's like there's no document selected, I'm thinking. And if we started the extension with the document selection, with the document selected, this probably would have worked. Okay, let's see if this works now and see if I can demonstrate to you what the prototype looks like. So this is just the prototype code. There's probably a heap of problems with it. I was just sort of hack and slash coding my way through this, so I'm not surprised that I do find problems with it when I try to run it in different situations. So let's try doing this. Oh, we've got the breakpoint. Let's just get rid of the breakpoint. Get rid of that breakpoint as well. Okay, so we've got an empty Kanban board. Let's see if... Okay, cool. So this is some progress, at least, debugging this problem and fixing it. And now I can show you how this works. I can basically edit my Kanban board here. You can see over here how fix the home page has gone to the bottom, and I can move it back to the top, and it's gone back to the top here. So that's the prototype of what I'm doing, and being able to edit these Markdown to-do lists within Visual Studio Code so that we can have to-do lists and project boards within our code repos and edit them directly from there without ever leaving Visual Studio Code. Okay, let's stop that. Now I just want to come back to where I left it last week, which is that we had I'd installed Jest and I had this error come up. I can't show you the error because I've actually fixed it, but I'll show you what I did to fix it. So this is the working directory that I was working in the live stream last week. I do a git status here. Actually, I'm going to look at this using source tree. It's going to be a little bit easier to see the changes if I use source tree. Source tree is a great user interface for Git that was created by Atlassian. Now, I often use the command line for Git, but there's nothing wrong with having a user interface, and it makes it real easy to kind of browse the changes that you've made. So we can see that last week, hopefully this text isn't too small. I can't seem to zoom source tree, but anyway, here we'd installed Jest. We'd installed well, that's the types for Jest, and that's actually Jest itself there. We'd installed TS Node so that I could run TypeScript directly without having to compile it. We'd created a Jest config. I'd hoped this would fix the problem, but it didn't. Well, not by itself anyway. We created that by running Jest with the flag init, so it looked like this. npx jest --init. That creates your initial Jest config. I'm going to do all that again in a second, actually, so I don't need to show you that just yet. I created a test that I was expecting to fail, and I just couldn't get it to run because the configuration was wrong. What I did do, now there was no real magic to this or anything. I did try Googling it, and then I was like, you know what? After a few minutes of trying to figure out from different things on Google and reading the docs and whatnot, I was like, why am I Googling this? Like, I've done this before. I've got this in other projects. So I looked at my open source project Minicule, and I looked up the configuration there, and I was missing this preset, TS Jest preset, that will allow me to use TypeScript with Jest, and I had to install that here. And that was basically all that it was. And just to show you that working, I can run npm test, and I should have a failing test. Come on. Yep, there we go. So expects true to be false. Obviously that's going to fail because true is never going to be false. So this is how I like to test my unit testing setup as soon as I've installed it. is to make a failing test. Even if it's not a real test, it doesn't matter. It just proves that Jest is there and it's working. I'll show you, if you look on my GitHub, there's a repo called TypeScript template. So this is another place you can go to see a working TypeScript setup. This is all set up for testing using Jest. It's got TS-lint for linting your code. It's got a debugging setup for VS Code. Of course, I didn't start with this repo because I started with a different repo. I started with that repo we saw before that showed you how to have a Visual Studio Code extension with a React UI embedded within it. But if you want to get started with the TypeScript project, check out my GitHub. Check out TypeScript template. It's minimal. There's not much there, but it's got an example of a test, and it's something you can use to get started with your own TypeScript projects. So what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to get this project fresh, which the version of it that's on GitHub now does not have Jest. I'm going to clone it again. I'm going to install Jest again, and hopefully we won't have any problems this time. So if you wanted to follow along, you could always download the zip file here, but it's pretty easy to use Git. You can just copy the command here, and once you've got Git installed on your own PC, type git clone and then paste in that what you got from there. If you're probably not gonna want to clone my repo, of course. You should probably click fork up here. Click the fork button. Fork it for yourself. That's basically your own copy of it. You can make changes to that, and if you want to contribute to my project, of course you can. You can then submit a pull request to get your changes back. We might cover that in a future live stream, how to do that. But for the moment, we're just going to try and get into some test-driven development. So because I've already cloned this, I've got to clone it to a separate directory, and I've already got a working directory there, which is the one from last week. I might just call this for today. I might just call this working 2. So I'm copying this project down from GitHub right now by doing a git clone. I'll go into there, make sure I get the right one. I'm going to start Visual Studio Code from this directory. I'm using Windows 10 here, but most of the commands I'm showing you, most of the things I'm showing you are going to work on Linux and Mac OS. And as you can see here, I'm actually using Linux commands on Windows. I've got git bash installed, which comes with a whole bunch of Linux commands. It's really cool. Okay, so the first thing you do whenever getting into someone's Git project, well, this is my own project, so I know what to do here, but just so that you know what to do when you come and grab this, these are the instructions here. The first thing we're going to do is an Npm install to get all the Npm dependencies. This could take a moment. While that's happening, I'm going to look at the rest of the instructions. So to get the UI, we're not really going to be using the UI today. We're not going to be worried. In a future live stream, we're going to be talking about React, and we're going to dive down into this React app here that implements the Kanban board. I'm not going to get into that today, but just in case it makes a difference, I'm going to just get that set up. I'm going to do the Npm install for the React app. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. It's taking a while. Come on. What I might do is I'm just going to open a new terminal here anyway, and so we're back in this project. I want to get React installed, not React. I want to get Jest installed. So I'm saving it as a development dependency. We don't need Jest installed as a production dependency. Obviously, it's just for testing. I'm also installing the Jest types. TS Node was another one that I had to be able to run TypeScript code directly. TS Node is like a drop-in replacement for Node, and it's really useful to have this in any TypeScript project. I think the other thing I needed was the TS preset. let me just go back. I'm just going to go back to my TypeScript template and just double check everything I've got to do here. So I'm going to open the package.json file for this. Also the Jest config file. I'll need that in a moment. I don't think I need to change anything into the TS config file. So I need Jest types. I've got that. I'll probably need the node types as well, if I don't have that already. Jest, I've got that there. TS Jest. Oh, hang on. I called it TS preset. That's actually TS Jest. TS node I've got. I don't need TS lint. I've already got TypeScript. I probably need a later version of TypeScript. I think I've done that. I think it's TypeScript version 3.8 that TS Jest needs. So let's get all those things installed. Now, after this is done, I'm going to create the Jest configuration file. I need the Jest configuration file to enable this TypeScript preset. If I don't have that, it's not going to be able to run TypeScript code. Now, there's other ways of getting TypeScript to work with Jest. You can use Babel as well, but I think that the setup is more complicated. I don't normally use Babel. I've used it like once or twice for different projects, but normally I don't use it. Normally I just directly use TS node or the TypeScript compiler to run my TypeScript code. I am actually running this off Wi-Fi hotspot because my broadband internet Wi-Fi does not really reach my home office out here. So hopefully this is not going to be too hit and miss. It's a pretty good speed internet normally. Cool, that's done. So I'm now going to run the Jest configuration initialization. So that's npx. Npx, if you haven't heard of it, it's a command that comes with Node.js. Now it allows you to run a command like Jest directly from the install dependency. So if you were using Node.js back in the day, you would have had to install Jest globally, like npm install -g Jest. You don't have to do that anymore. You can install it locally in your project. You save yourself a lot of dependency management hassle that way, and you don't get into this dependency management hell. So this asks you a few questions. Yep, it's going to set that up. That's cool. Would you like to use TypeScript? Yep. Node? Yep. Do you want to add coverage reports? Why not? I'm guessing V8. Automatically clear mocks. Yeah, this is a good thing to turn on, I think. Automatically clearing mocks after each test. Okay, so we have got a Jest configuration file now. Let's have a look at the setup. So if we have a look at package.json, so we've got a command in here that runs Jest when we run npm test. We've got Jest installed, the types for Jest, the types for Node.js. We've installed Jest, we've installed TS Jest, TS Node. We already had TypeScript. It's all looking pretty good. Here's the Jest configuration file. There's a lot of stuff in here commented out. What I'm going to do is just clear this out so you can see the minimum that we need to run Jest with TypeScript. Clear mocks, so we're clearing mocks after each test. We've got coverage enabled. I don't know if coverage is going to work. Let's just run that and see. That's going to tell us how much of our code is covered by our tests, which is a pretty useful thing to know. A lot of options here commented out. Just get rid of all that. The test environment is Node. I'm not really even sure if that makes sense for a Visual Studio Code extension, but I'm going to keep the JavaScript fairly. It's going to be cross-platform basically. So under Electron, the JavaScript is going to be running basically under the Electron instance that Visual Studio Code runs in, and that itself runs on Node. So I think that's going to be okay. I've never tried this before, by the way. I've done a fair bit of test-driven development I've used Jest on a couple of projects. I've used Mocha a lot more. I'm pretty much converting to Jest these days, but I've never done any automated testing on a Visual Studio Code extension before. So what you're seeing here is kind of a first for me. Anyway, so that's the cut down version of the Jest configuration file. There is something that's missing here, and if I don't add that, actually let's just run this. I know this configuration is unfinished, but let's just run it and see what happens. I don't actually have any tests in this version, in this copy of the code yet, so it did fail because I can't find any tests. So I am going to add some tests. What did I do that? Created the wrong thing. I need to create a folder. Create a folder called test, and I'll put a converter.test.ts. So this is, I'm actually, in a moment I'll show you what I'm actually going to be testing. For the moment I'm just going to get, you know, something really basic in here. I'm using the Mocha syntax of testing here because that's really just what I'm used to. That all looks good. I'm going to try running this test. So this is just testing that true should be equal to false, which is not. So this is what's going to give me a failing test. Just to check that my framework, my setup is working. I don't think it is going to work because I know that I'm still missing something. That actually works, which is surprising. I'll show you what I thought was going to be missing. If I what I'm missing is this preset TS Jest. So it seems to have automatically picked that up and be automatically working. I don't think that was in my Jest configuration. Let's just check that again. What am I looking at? Could have sworn I had a Jest configuration file here a second ago. What happened to it? Let's try that again. That's so weird. Not sure what happened just then. I seem to have missed that. Okay. Okay, let's just, I've recreated that configuration file. Let me do a git status just to see what I've got here. Yeah, cool. So I've got an updated package file. I've created a Jest configuration file. Seems to have omitted my test file. Actually, I've got a slight problem with that name there. Let me just check my git ignore file here. That's strange. Let's see what source tree has to say about it. So I'm just going to add that project. So because we just cloned this fresh, I'm just going to add it the repo to source tree. And here we can see what we've done. So you can see that it's added the test command, it's added Jest node. I'm going to stage that because I want to keep these changes now. I'm going to stage my Jest configuration file. I'm going to stage my first test. I'm not going to commit that yet. But I do want to just see this working. So I'm just going to change that to true. I'm expecting true to be true. So this should be a passing test now. I'll run the npm test again. It's running Jest. Cool, we've got a passing test. I'm going to stage this, but I'm not actually going to... Actually, I'm going to unstage that. Because what I want to do is I just want to get this Jest configuration in. So I'm going to commit this. I could commit it from here, like type the message here, commit it here, but I'll do it from the command line just so you can see what that's like. So you can see I've already got staged the things that I want to commit, my package.json, my Jest configuration. I've got this working, you know, if I break this at some point in the future, I want to be able to roll back to the working version. And that's what version control can do for us. It can allow us to roll back breaking changes like that. So I'm going to commit this working Jest configuration. I'll push that up. So if you're following along and you look at that repo, you'll see this commit is up there now with a working Jest configuration. I haven't committed the test because we're running out of time now. We're up to 28 minutes already, and I'm supposed to cap this at 30 minutes. So not getting as far through as what I'd like, but I'm going to start the TDD process. We're going to do one test before we finish. I want to show you what the inputs are going to look like. I'll do that with Dataforge Notebook. So when I was doing prototyping, before I started kind of getting into this project for real, I did a bunch of prototypes, a bunch of tests. This is one. This is a test using Dataforge Notebook that shows how to basically parse a Markdown file to an abstract syntax tree. And then we're rendering the abstract syntax tree here. So this is like a parsed data structure of the Markdown file. What I want to do is I want to convert this abstract syntax tree, I want to convert it to the Kanban board data format. And you can see an example of that if we go back into the extension here. If we look down into the React app here, there's some example data here. This is what I was using to prototype the Kanban board. So you can see that this is JSON data. There's an array of lanes. Each lane has cards. So these are the actual tasks that are in each column in the Kanban board. So what I've got to do is I've got to basically write code using test-driven development to convert this abstract syntax tree here. So that's the abstract syntax tree for the Markdown. I've got to write code to convert it to this format. Now I prototyped that already. I'll show you the prototype version of the code. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong file there. If I look down in here instead. So Markdown to board. So this is the prototype function, which takes the Markdown, parses it to an abstract syntax tree, and then it basically does a traversal, a fairly shallow traversal of the abstract syntax tree, and all the while it's building up board data. So it's got a board data object here. It's adding lanes to it that it's configured here. It's adding cards to it here, and it's returning that. And that's what we're rendering in the Kanban board. If I scroll down, I can show you how that's actually plugged in. So we've got this is the render function of the React component. We're using JSX here. So we've got the board here, and the data is plugged into it here. So the data is converted from Markdown, plugged into the board renders it. We get this callback when the data changes, and we need to basically go from the board back to the Markdown. So this function board to Markdown is another function that I prototyped. Now the problem is that in this function here, if we just jump back to that, in Markdown to board, I mean, I just hacked this together really quickly. There's probably a bunch of edge cases that I'm not catering for. I'm not catering for errors in the data, and also the Markdown format is more complicated than the Kanban board data format. There's more that you could fit in there. And so I feel like if there's something in there that's not going to be handled by the Kanban board data, you know, through the serialization and deserialization process, I could lose data, because the whole Markdown file is going to be wiped out by whatever's come from the Kanban board. So I could be losing user data that doesn't fit the Kanban board format. I don't want to do that. I'm going to have to deal with that in the future. Probably in the next live stream I'll deal with that. I'm not going to deal with it today. But what I need now is, because I want to write some I want to do some test-driven development to get from this data structure into the Kanban board data. I want to get this. I want to export this as JSON so I can use it in my tests. And now I've already got a notebook that I was playing around with the other day in which I did this. I just called it test notebook. This isn't committed to the code repository. I started with the previous one, so this is the same as that other notebook we were looking at, except I just don't need a lot of this other code here. And what I'm doing here is I'm reading the Markdown file to do.md. I'm converting it here from Markdown to the abstract syntax tree, and then I'm using the Node.js file system function just to write that out as a data file. So I've taken that AST, I've written it to a data file, and I've got that. You can see that in this version of the project that I've got here. So this is that abstract syntax tree as JSON data, and you can explore this. You can see that there's a heading here in the Markdown, the text of the heading. That's like the project, the description for the whole project. If you go through here, I can see a heading of depth 3. Basically, that is the beginning of the lane. And the children of that is just basically the description of the lane. And then following that is a list. And then we've got basically a bunch of list items, and the list items are the cards that we're going to put in the lane. So I'm running out of time. I'm over time actually, but I'm gonna do one test just to give us a starting point, and we'll continue on from that in the next live stream that I do. Now what I'd normally do, so I've called this test suite converter because it's a data converter. It's a terrible name. I'll probably come up with a better name for it, hopefully, as we go through this process. What I'd normally do when I'd be doing a bit of planning for test-driven development is I'd write out a list of the tests, like, you know, can load empty board, can load a column in a board, you know, can load multiple columns, what else have we got? We got cards. So, well, that's a task in the Kanban board. Can load a column. Can load a task. Can load multiple tasks. There's more to it than this. I mean, tasks have labels. They have who they're assigned to. You know, maybe dates and stuff like that. I don't know how much of this the Kanban board even supports, but I know that this is a good starting point. So let's just try and do the first one. I mean, this is going to be easy. So it's basically, okay, at this point I actually need a place to put my code. I should have chosen a name that was easier to test. So here I'm going to have a function that's Markdown AST to board data being passed in a Markdown AST. I don't really have a type for this in TypeScript, so I'm just going to use any. And what we're coming back with is board data. I mean, that doesn't exist yet, so let's just make that now. That's going to be a TypeScript interface. It doesn't really need anything yet. This case is bugging me. I'm going to have to change that. That's a bit better. So this should have a type, like this Markdown AST should have a type. I will probably put a type on that eventually once I've figured out like what that should be. At the moment, I just have to return something, so I'm just going to return an empty JavaScript object there. That means that compiles. This is not a great way to start test-driven development because, like, I'm writing a test here. When I'm doing test-driven development, I should write each test so that it fails first, and then when I implement the code behind that test, it then passes, so I know that the test actually works. It's a little bit tricky to do that in this case. I better put a comment here. Always like to write good comments. Probably should one up here as well. Now I'm going to call this function. I'm going to give it an empty AST. And I just want to check that basically returns empty board data. I'm just going to automatically import that. There you go. Visual Studio Code's beautiful like that. It just automatically imports things for you. So I'm going to expect that my board data to be an empty object. Now, honestly, I don't know how to get this test to fail because, I mean, I could have, if I was just using JavaScript, I could have got it to fail and then got it to pass by returning undefined. But TypeScript won't let me do that. You know, I'd have to modify my return value here to be board data or undefined. I'm just going to do this. I don't normally think this is necessary, but I'm going to do this just to show you that we've got a failing test. Npm test. And we have a failing test. Oh look, it's giving me the error that I got last time. And I think it's just because of the problem I had last time with the configuration. So let's just try and quickly rectify that by setting the preset to Jest. Hopefully that's all we need to fix that. Cool, so I've got a failing test. The result of this function is not what I expect it to be. It's not an empty board object. I'm going to run this in live reload mode now, which is really useful. And I normally like to create a new script for that called test.watch, and it's really just running Jest with the watch option. So npm run test watch. Now it's going to keep running my tests every time I change my code, and in fact I can run them side by side. So I've got a failing test here. Now hopefully this is going to work. I can return an empty object. I'll save that. I'm saving that. My tests are rerunning. It does not like that, and I think I can show you why. I think it's is comparing the objects by identity, and in that case, one object is not going to be equal to the other because they'll be separate instances. But there is a different option here called toEqual, which is like a non-identity equality. Hey, pat myself on the back. I have got a passing test. My first passing test in this project. I'm just going to switch this back to undefined just for a second, just to make sure that after the code change that I just did, that my test still fails. Cool, it does fail. I put that back, it should pass. Now, part of test-driven development is after you've got a green test is to do a bit of refactoring, but to keep all your tests passing. And I can actually demonstrate that here because I can get rid of this undefined. So I can tighten up my TypeScript types now that I don't have that there anymore. Still got passing tests, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to do one more test before we wrap it up. And because that was a pretty trivial test, right? There's not much code that I'm actually testing there with that. But this can load empty board, that is kind of important because, you know, I'm potentially going to write, you know, quite a few tests here. I'm going to be writing a lot of code, and as I go through writing that code, I don't want this condition to fail. I want to always be able to support an empty Markdown file, which is effectively what this is. This empty AST here represents an empty Markdown file, and I always want to be able to handle that. I always want a test that shows me that I can handle that, no matter what other code I write. So let's do can load a column, and I'll take that off my list there. Just going to see if I can get a bit more editing space here. I still want to be able to see the tests. This kind of thing, it's great to do on a desktop PC where you've got multiple screens, so you can see your tests running on one screen and you can be editing your code, saving your code on another screen. Now, this is where I actually need some example Markdown data, so I might go back to my example Markdown data that I've got here. What am I doing here? I basically want this heading and then the list that comes after it. So I'm going to copy this to a new file. I'm not going to save the file yet. I'm going to delete some of the stuff here that I don't care about. And so I've got to the heading here. I collapse that. I want to keep that. I want to keep the list. I don't want to keep everything in the list, but first I'm going to delete everything else that's in here. Because, you know, if I tried to have all this in here, I'd basically just be testing too much. And I'm only trying to create a really small thing here. I don't need this position, start and end either. Like, I don't really think that's going to be an important part of this, so I'm just going to cut down this test data to the simplest thing that I can. I'm going to do a similar thing in here. There's just one child in there, that's the text. I don't think I need this position here. I think I can just ignore that. The list here, there's a bunch of stuff here that I probably don't need as well. I'll just leave that in for the moment though. I don't actually need any children here. So I'm not testing that I can load tasks. I'm testing that I can load a single lane, which basically means anything that's in here is just irrelevant for this test. I will be using this in a future test. That will be in my next live stream. I'll get rid of that, and I'll get rid of the position here as well. So you can see we've got, I'll just zoom out a little bit. Hopefully the text won't be too small. But this is my test data. So this is my the Markdown abstract syntax tree that I need for my first test. I'll copy that over here. I'm just going to include this directly. These tests can be refactored later. The nice thing about JSON is that it's just basically just JavaScript. It's a cut down version of JavaScript. So you can literally copy it in. So I've copied that into my test. I'm just going to collapse that. And I think later on, because there'll be a lot of test data in here, I might extract this to a separate file. We'll see. Just to keep the tests nice and clean. But for the moment, there's no need to do that. I'm just going to keep it in here. So actually, let's call this test Markdown AST. I can copy the same basic code that I've got there for the first test, but this time I'm going to be passing that AST in. Now, what are my expectations here? What am I expecting to come back? Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the board data format looks like. There's an example of it here. So it's a JavaScript object basically with lanes. Underneath the lanes, you can drill down all the way to the cards, the tasks that are there. But the important thing here is that we can load one lane. So that's going to be like an object with lanes. It's going to be an array. And there's going to be one lane. What is the lane going to be called? Well, if we look down into the details of a lane here, you can see a lane's got an ID, a title, probably a bunch of stuff we don't care about, cards. Well, let's start with cards. So I can say that we're not interested at the moment, we're not testing a lane that has multiple cards. So we're just going to leave that as an empty array. ID, don't know what we're going to use as the ID yet. Well, I kind of do have an idea for that, but I don't want to jump the gun too much here. Now the title is going to come from our test data. So if we open the test data up, we can see that the heading is to do. And for the moment, I'm just going to make the ID be the same as the heading. So we're going to change that later, but for the moment, that's going to be pretty cool. If we go back to where the tests are, we should have another test, a failing test. Yep, the test is failing. Let's just maximize that so we can see what's going on here. So our first test is passing, but we can load an empty board. That's fine. We haven't even changed that code, so we expect that still to be passing. Our test can load a column has failed. It's saying what it's expecting. So it's expecting to receive this object with lanes, with one object in it, with an ID of to do and a title of to do. Instead, what it's got is an object with nothing. So it's got that empty data because all we're returning is we've hard coded that function to return an empty object and an empty Kanban board. And so of course that test is going to fail. Now, if I jump into this function here, so this is where we're going to have to write the code. This is where we're going to write the code to load the Kanban board or the lane from the AST, and we're going to satisfy this second test. But we're way over time here. I was meant to stop at 30 minutes, but we've gone way over time. I think this is going to be a habit actually. It's going to be really hard to stick to 30 minutes. But I'll be back. I'll be back in the next live stream. I'll be back. We're going to implement this test. We're going to implement a bunch of other tests here. We're going to fully flesh out this function Markdown AST to board data, and that'll be in the next session. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to work out how to preserve data that's in the AST or in the Markdown file that doesn't fit the Kanban board format. And I'm thinking to do that, we're going to use this really cool library called Ramda. So this is a functional library for JavaScript programmers. I'm nowhere near like an expert in this. I've used it like once or twice. There's a lot here. There's a lot here that you can do with this to improve your functional coding in JavaScript. I'm definitely going to make use of the path function. I've got a little example here that I set up. So this is the Ramda REPL. It's really cool. I'm going to show you this again in the next session. I've basically plugged in a Markdown AST here. So that's just like the JSON that we looked at earlier. At the end, I'm using the Ramda path function to pull out a particular node in the abstract syntax tree. You can see on the right here how it's showing you what that is. It's this one here, this one at the end, this reference by the position. I could pull out the start node here by doing start. And you can see here at the end it's pulled out that particular node. So I think I'm going to use this to figure out how to, record where in the AST lanes and cards were loaded from. And I'm going to use that to kind of wire edits to the Kanban board are going to be wired back into the AST so that we can serialize the AST back to the Markdown file without losing any of our users' data. So that's it for today. I'll be back in a week at least, maybe sooner. But look out for my Twitch channel. Look me up on Twitter, AshleyDavis75, and let me know what you think of these live streams. Have a good day.